to be able to offer this. We're going to offer this on our website. Probably we'll get it posted to the website tomorrow, late morning around the lunch hour. So if you miss something, if you want to listen to something again, or if you have a friend that you think could really benefit from this, please send them the link, send them an email, give them a phone call. We'd love to have as many people as we can get this good information. If any of you need a certificate of attendance, I need you to type your first and last name and the word certificate in the chat section. So then that way I know to send one of those out to you. I'll probably get those out tomorrow, Monday at the latest, and I will send those via email. Don't look in the mail. I won't send them that way. I'll be emailing those to you. And now at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Sarah Bubna. She is one of our amazing case managers here at Family Service and Guidance Center. Our case managers are the folks who are really out there in the streets where the rubber hits the road, helping families assess their needs, assess their strengths and limitations, and helping them play up their strengths. So we always love it when we get somebody like Sarah who's enthusiastic, and she's kind of an expert. So we like to take advantage of that too. So I'm going to mute myself and be quiet. And Sarah, you go ahead and take it away, and I will turn this over to you, and I'll get you put down as the host so you can share your screen.
Okay, sounds good. Hello, everyone. Yeah, just give me 1 second. We're going to do a switch over here so I can share my PowerPoint with you. You don't have to pay super close attention to the PowerPoint. So if you're cooking dinner or doing something else, it just has some resources on it. But I'll be talking us through it all. So I don't want anyone to think that they're missing something major there. Thank you for joining tonight. Like Jim said, my name is Sarah. I'm a case manager here at Family Service. And I guess I've been working here about 3.5 years. And I work with kids of all ages. Right now, most of the kids I'm working with tend to be middle school and high school. And as you know, some of you are parents or caregivers to teenagers. They get a little set in their ways. So it's not that there's nothing that we can do, you know, like, oh, they're 16, they already have their phone, it's out the window. Definitely not. But I did gear part of this conversation towards kind of parents or caregivers of younger kids, just to kind of help with some, you know, as you're raising them, they're really young, getting some tech literacy in there. But hopefully I'll kind of hit some stuff that will help for all ages. And we had really great questions submitted ahead of time. And so I'm going to answer all of those at the end. And I'm really going to try to hit like every single question that was asked, which I think will be good to hear from. But if I don't get to something in the first part of the presentation, don't worry. Hopefully I'll get to it at the end. So the setup here is probably for the first 15, 20 minutes, I'll talk through some kind of research that I found and things I did on the subject, and then we'll get to the questions and hopefully cover all those. So two kind of main things, or things I wanted you as parents and caregivers to know, and then things that you feel that you can do that'll help you hopefully feel empowered. The first part of what to know is there is a lot of research. There seems to be a lot of people in my generation and older generations that are concerned about you know, the amount of time younger generations are using screen time, how they're using social media. So there's been a lot of research in recent years about, you know, what is this going to be like? What are going to be the long-term effects? And we don't actually know. You know, now we can look at TV. TV's been around for, you know, a really long time. Many generations can see some effects. So there's still things that are in the works, but there are people out there that are concerned, that are doing research. And so I try to get all of the things I could and distill it down. And really what I found was that it kind of in summation, research is showing a couple things. One, the younger the child, like absolutely the less screen time that they should have. And then the other kind of major thing that research is hitting on is that kids are getting a lot of screen time. And obviously, you know, that's only increased this year with COVID, which no one, you know, could control, online schooling and all of that. But hopefully I have some ideas that can kind of help, you know, bring that back down a little bit. So studies are kind of showing that even with younger kids, the more TV that they watch is correlated sometimes to you know, higher risk of maybe attention issues as they get older. Part of that is that even the TV that, you know, I watched as a kid a couple generations ago had much longer like screenshots, and now things are, you know, you've watched probably kids shows and in 1 or 2 seconds they're flipping, and so kids are just constantly, you know, their attention is switching. And so I think that part of that might lead to that. And the recommended amount of screen time, don't get mad at me here, for a child from birth to 2 years is actually none. And I thought like, oh gosh, the parents of every toddler out there are going to be mad at me. And the idea there is not that, if your child, if the TV's on and they stop and they look at it, or, it's going to like absolutely irreparably harm them, but really that they want to make sure that babies are getting face-to-face time with loving caregivers, because that helps, babies who grow up to be kids know how to regulate their emotions and how to read emotions. And so kind of one of the experts said it in a way that I thought was really helpful. It's that they said technology has altered the world that we live in, but it hasn't altered the time it takes for a child's brain to develop. So kind of in thinking that, as much as there's wonderful things, Baby Einstein, and there's apps, for kids to use to learn their colors before they go to school, those aren't bad, but there's certain things developmentally and physiologically that we can't progress further. And so it's okay to take the time for kids to learn what they need at certain stages. And again, just research is showing that no amount of technology can really replace the face-to-face interactions, and that is with younger kids, but that's also true with older kids, even though they'll tell us otherwise. Again, in working with teenagers, all I would hear was complaints about school. And then interestingly, this year when they had to do online, which every kid before that was like, yeah, I'm doing online school and I don't have time for this. They're all like, yeah, when can I go back to school? Like, I kind of miss seeing my friends. And it's like, oh, this is a big switch. So I think even older kids really need that face-to-face interaction that they say they don't. And I'll talk a little bit more when I answer the questions about what the other specific guidelines are for ages past the age of 2, not just leaving it there. Studies are also showing right now, like a recent one was that kids between 8 and 12 years old spend about 9 hours a day using screens. And when they did this study, it was pre-COVID, and they didn't even include school time with devices. I was like, oh my goodness. So, if you count 8 hours a day at school and then 9 hours of screen time and then sleeping, that's like their whole day. And the researchers said that kids, in these younger generations, they do a lot of multitasking. So kids doing their homework, but then they're also YouTubing. So that's part of where that like high amount of screen time comes in. And not all the multitasking is bad. I used to listen to music on a CD player, when I did homework. But I think just as parents and caregivers, we sort of want to ask ourselves like the question, like, this technology is not necessarily good or bad, but is it helping my child meet the markers that I've set for them, to grow into a conscious and involved citizen of the world? Can my child be creative outside of technology? Do they spend time outside regularly? Are they able to talk with older adults in an appropriate manner? Can't talk, guys. Do they make eye contact with people? Things that we would want our child to learn. And so some of those things are not going to learn, on technology, and that we have to drive that. Another thing I noticed just spending time in different homes is that, a lot of times the TV's on and no one's even watching it. And so just even analyzing our own routines. Do we have our TV on at our house for a certain reason if no one's watching it? Could we turn it off just as one less distraction, for our kids? So I just think always asking ourselves the questions as the adults and caregivers is going to help us make the best decisions for our own kid. And then just constantly, I think, considering age appropriateness. One of the researchers put it as, would you give a kitchen knife to your 2-year-old? No, obviously not. Well, then why would we hand a 7-year-old a device that has access to the internet and they could really view anything in the whole world on it? Do they know how to process that information, like emotionally, developmentally, that they might stumble across? And are we prepared to have those conversations with them if they see something violent or sexually inappropriate? And well, hopefully as a parent, you leave this tonight feeling more empowered. I just want to say it's okay to feel out of place, and that the fact that we are parents, grandparents, whoever you are to your child, that we can't keep up with it all. And we're not going to, honestly. But you still have wisdom and experience as a parent, as a caregiver, that your child doesn't, no matter how much technology they have. And one of the authors, I was going to read you this quote, it felt encouraging to me, was that they just said the most important thing you can do is to trust yourself and realize that your knowledge about your kids and what they need trumps other people's opinions on the matter. Whatever you do, don't just throw up your hands and give up, though it feels like it sometimes. The most important adult in your child's life is you, and it's up to you to shape their relationship with technology, curate the media they interact with, and as much as you can, equip them with the tools to make good decisions when they're out in the world or when they're taking the world in via their device. And so hopefully you feel confident just to influence your kids in a way that you want them to grow up, but also to remember that the technology is influencing them, and that's something we have less, control over. But I think at the end of the day, parental influence and guidance really plays a bigger part than we maybe give ourselves credit for. And also don't feel pressured. Kids are really good, as we know, like, I want this, I want this, I want this, and saying it till they get it. But they can survive without technology, or definitely some technology. They need their Chromebook for school, but they don't necessarily need a gaming system, or they don't need to be on it all day long. So they're always going to say that they need things, but I think we just have to remember sometimes, like, they're okay taking a break from that, or they're okay without that. And they really, research has also shown they don't need to be constantly entertained. It's okay for them to be kind of bored sometimes, even though that's when they ask a lot more questions, to us about like what they can do, and they're bored, and they can get a little more intense at those times. It's actually part of their development to find ways to be creative and to entertain themselves, to soothe themselves if they're feeling upset. That's part of growing. So just a reminder on that. You already know this probably, but just hopefully you feel, again, empowered as the adult in their life to guide things. So kind of in thinking what you can do, I think coming up with a plan. This is particularly true, I think, with younger kids, but we know that everything in the world is out there, and as many parental controls and things as we do, kids will access things, unfortunately, accidentally or not, that we don't want them to see. So I think coming up with a plan for your child, and this ranges from a 4-year-old that might have seen a scary preview for something or an ad, to, a 10-year-old that maybe accidentally accesses porn. And I know these are hard conversations to have, but I think talking with kids and just saying, hey, we've got this plan, this is how we do things in our family, and this is to protect you from seeing things you shouldn't see. But knowing that when those things do happen, working towards comforting your child. I'm so sorry you saw that. That was scary. I'm sorry you saw that thing that was for adults. And then reminding them, this is why we have these boundaries. This is why we don't use dad's iPad. We use, this tablet because it has a kid controls. And I know it died, the battery ran out, but next time let, mom or grandpa know, and we'll charge it for you, versus like getting on something that it didn't have, and then you saw something you didn't need to see. So I just think, that reminder that creating and keeping an open relationship with kids is always going to help. That way, if there's something with bullying or somebody online who's trying to talk to them that shouldn't, saying like, I'm going to tell your parents, doesn't become a threat. That kid knows, well, my parents and I can talk about all this stuff, so it's not really a big deal. And I just think collaborating with kids of any age, help, like getting with them and saying like, okay, let's make a list of things to do when your screen time is over, because you've set screen time for them. These are the things that we're going to do. So older kids usually know not to say they're bored, because they know like a tour is coming. Younger kids are like, I'm bored. It's like, well, we're going to make a list of things, and you do some of those things first. And then, if you can't do that, then you talk with mom and we'll do something else. And I think that's easy. That's an easier discussion to have when everyone's calm, not during a time when the kid is already supposed to have put the device away and everyone's mad and we're yanking it from their hand. And, like, now we need to find something else for you to do. Well, do that ahead of time. And then kids kind of know that's the expectation. When the timer goes off, the screen goes away, and then I can do any one of these other things. So to that end, definitely setting time limits. And all of the things that I read and accessed, it was like time limits. Unfortunately, they didn't have like a ton of specifics. Like, if your kid is 12, they should have 2.5 hours a day. But really, one of the big ideas was turning all devices off during meal times. I know that's hard. Not everyone eats together as a family. There's baseball games and all those different things. So just maybe when anyone's eating at different times, if it's not all together. And then 1 to 2 hours before bed, and not letting kids have devices in their room, which I know is really tough because kids use, like an app to fall asleep or different things. And that might not be bad, but it might be things that maybe aren't internet friendly. And I'm promising you that kids have told me, and including elementary age kids, they do not go to sleep if they have their tablet in their room or their TV or their game. They're like, oh, my parents fall asleep, and then I stay up till 1 a.m. And then we're like, well, I wonder why they're having a meltdown at school. So just saying, from the kids' mouths, they do not sleep if those things are in there. And just remembering that, tech time for a lot of kids it's a preferred activity when it's not school. So it can be taken away. Like, they won't die without it. If they're not using it in the way that you deem appropriate, it's okay to set a limit to that. I work with a kid who got really mad at his gaming system. He threw the headset and he broke it. He was like 5th or 6th grade. So he knew what he was doing. And then he got a new one. And then he was like, oh yeah, and I also got some V-Bucks, which is like a way for kids to spend more time gaming. And I was like, that is confusing to me, or I think we view it sometimes as parents as this, well, they have to have it. It's part of it's like, they don't have to have it. And if they can't be responsible with it, it's okay to set some limits there. So he thought I was mean because I'm like, well, if I was mom, I would have had you do some chores to earn some money to get a new headset, not just, hand it over to you. It's like, oh, you are so mean. And I think just explaining to kids why there's time limits, why you have software that blocks certain things, even for younger kids, just the why is, they're going to ask why if we don't tell them. So, why we have an app that allows, you to see what your kids are doing online. It's still our job to teach them about the whys. And the worst part probably is our job to model good behavior with technology. And we're really bad at it too. And we always are like, the kids, but I mean, I find myself, I use my phone a lot for work and I'm with a teenager and they're telling me something. And then I'm like, I go to just check the time. And then you see you have text messages. I'm like, hold on one second. So I, find myself even doing that. And I'm like, okay, I need to model this good behavior because I'd be mad if a kid was doing that, or I'd be like, teenagers are always on their phones. So it was interesting. Some of the authors talked about kids that they work with, and they asked the kids like what they hated about what their parents did, with their phones. And the kids are like, yeah, my parent comes to watch my baseball game and I look up and they're like on their phone. And so just a reminder that we as adults aren't always great at it either. And so trying to, be better so that we can be good role models for kids. And I think that's sort of the last thing I was gonna say about that part too, is just even when you're collaborating with your kids, you're talking about the pros and cons of technology. It's not all bad. I mean, kids are creating a lot online. They're learning, technology way ahead of time, before they get to college. It's some things I had to learn in college or in high school. They're able to, communicate with friends and connect with people. And so there's a lot of positives. It shouldn't always be about no, or negatives. I think then kids are even more like, oh, well, mom says no. So talking with them about the positives, but also maybe the negatives, like there's addictive qualities to technology. There's violence sometimes that we can't see, sometimes sexually inappropriate things. There's cyberbullying that happens, and making kids aware, again, age appropriate, of what they might have to, experience, or why we're setting the limits is because we don't want them to have to deal with all of that. And I would say also too, I know it's hard for parents because they always feel judged for how we do things, but really utilizing people around you. Like I would ask, parents that are way more restrictive than you, and even parents that are way more open than you are with technology with their kids, like what they do or what they've seen as pros and cons, just to even get ideas. School social workers are available. They have a lot of knowledge. If your child works with anyone from family service, like therapists or case managers, we always have ideas, things we like to talk about. But just that, like, use, the people around you. Like, you don't, as the one person, have to make all the decisions for your kid. Please don't feel, don't be shy, don't feel judged, because we're all kind of muddling through this together. We're raising a whole new generation that are, have had technology available the whole time to them. And I think this is like the hard part, is that because kids can access anything, it just sometimes brings up conversations sooner than we're willing or we wanted to have with them about sex and violence and things like that. And so just a reminder that those conversations are always important. And I think even though they're awkward for us as parents and caregivers, it's the best way that a kid can learn about those things is coming from us, rather than something online that's negative or just, isn't the message that we want to give them. Yeah, so that was kind of all the things that I had there. A lot coming at you, and I talk fast. But I really wanted to have time to get to all the questions that were asked, and I'll cover some more things here too. So I wrote them all down so I wouldn't miss any of them. So hopefully if you submitted a question, I'm going to get to it here. Several of the questions were the same, which was great. I mean, once we know it's like important. One of them being like, how much time is good? Somebody else kind of asked about the current research on the impact of screen time, and then what's the right age for kids to be exposed to screens. So one of the main studies was done by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And they're the ones that recommend like no screen time for younger than 18 months, except for video chatting. And then kind of that 18 to 24 months, they were like, well, if parents choose the media and they watch it with their kids to help explain what they're seeing, they said for 2 to 5 years old, screen time about 1 hour a day, and really making sure that it's high quality programming, something like Sesame Street that has like research behind it, kids are learning. But then just this idea that, even past those ages, parents should continue to co-view media with their kids, which is way easier said than done, because of course we're like going to give them the iPad for 30 minutes so we can like make dinner and do things, and no one has time to like sit down with their kid all day and watch it. But there's a lot of great things, on Netflix and things now where you can just download certain things, so you can't access whatever. So maybe it's something you have viewed with your kid, and then they can just rewatch that, when they're on a younger age. And then they actually said, the American Academy of Pediatrics, that for older kids, the numbers are less important, and really the focus should be on limits, content, and then communication. So like, a kid 6 and up, but definitely placing consistent limits on the time they spend, what type, of media they use, and then just ensuring that it doesn't replace like their sleep time, physical activity, and other healthy things that we want. So I think that, that's you as the parent saying like what times it's okay for your kid to do that, for your family, and then what times are going to be media free, like at mealtime or right before bed, or in the morning before school. You don't need to watch YouTube then. Someone else kind of asked about the impacts of aggression, empathy, and self-esteem, which was like a great question. That's also been researched to some extent. And it seems like the findings are kind of a mixed bag. Social media can heighten the negatives, like the violence, because there's a lot of videos online that kids can just, easily access with violence, and video games that are violent. And they have known that, study that kids can be more aggressive after watching those. But then I also, this younger generation, I see teens that really are able to like love themselves and have these great self-esteems. And a lot of it is because it's reflected in media, or there's social media where they can connect with other kids that are into anime, because maybe kids in their class aren't. So that's like what's tough about it. There's really like tough things, but there's been some really positive things as well. But again, I'll argue that the research shows that no amount of social media really replaces the parent or caretaker's ability to instill those qualities in their kid. And so maybe sometimes it's just heightening what's already going on for our kids. And obviously it's easier to instill those qualities in younger kids. But I think it still matters to teenagers as well. Again, like I said, they were, like, oh, we hate school. And I'm like, wait, when can we be back in school now that we can't have school? So yeah. Another question was kind of how much is too much? And I would say like, kind of in mental health, the way the barometer for measuring things is like, how much does that impact, like what we would say is impact functioning, like family relationships, friend relationships, hygiene, things that are part of a healthy life. How much is anything that we're dealing with impact that? And so that would be, the extreme end of it, a kid too much because they don't want to stop playing the game to take a shower, or they don't want to stop, Instagramming, to go to school. So that would be on the extreme end. But I think, hopefully the goal is to create kind of a chance for our kids to have a healthy relationship with that. So, you as the parent, it's like anything, in your house, like your kids have maybe a certain bedtime where they, it's in this house, an expectation that you go to school. And so I would, again, try to have that conversation versus instead of going to your kid and say, well, 3 hours is too much, we're going to go to 2 hours. And that might be true, that's okay, but it might not have anything to do with the amount of hours, even though you've set some limits, as much as like, hey, we set these limits and the 2 hours a day, but it seems like you're still not wanting to do your homework and you're wanting to do these other healthy things. And so we might have to talk about making a different time. And I think that how much is too much is a little hard to answer, just because, ages vary, kids' maturity varies. But again, I would try to have a conversation with the kid during a calm time, and making a plan about, okay, this has kind of been suffering, so we're going to try something different here. We're going to take this, or we're going to adjust these times to see if we can kind of get this under control, you know, and do it when everyone's calm versus like getting upset because you're like teenagers texting all the time and then just, you know, grabbing the phone and checking it doesn't like usually make the situation go well. Another question was kind of about ways to help kids balance time on their devices. This is hard. Again, I know it depends a lot on the ages of kids and what they like to do. So maybe you're a family that enjoys playing video games and watching movies together. So screen time is part of family time, which is fine. That's not like nothing negative there. And yes, that counts as screen time, but I would say it's also this like positive because it's a way that they're engaging. So instead of, I would be, you know, maybe more concerned about a kid who's like, well, I'm going to spend, you know, 6 hours in my room alone gaming, and it's a game where it's not even interactive online. They're just doing it on their own versus, you know, well, our family, like we were watching the Avengers and we watched this other movie right after that. And so, okay, so that's 5 hours of a movie, but it's together and the family can talk about it afterward. I would talk with kids about using their screen time. For a lot of kids, I know they use it as a way to unwind and sometimes spend time alone after a long day at school, especially kids that are more introverted or more easily stimulated. They might just need that to like relax a little bit. But I would say, you know, at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean they need to do it for 8 hours on a weekend. You know, talking with them about, hey, we still have to have that balance. Like it's okay for you to use it unwind, but we need to also do things that bring us together. With other people. We, you know, we don't sit at home and eat cake all day, every day. We would like to, because it's not healthy for us in the long run. So the same would go, you know, for screen time with kids. It's like to do it all day, every day is ultimately going to take away from other things developmentally that they need. And this is, again, a conversation you can have with them. Like, hey, our brains need time to unwind. Our brains need time to do other things, creative things with our hands. And so, yeah, coming up with a plan. Maybe they get 1 hour a day to watch shows or YouTube after school. And then, you know, on the weekends, they get 2 to 3 hours to play video games with a friend or a sibling. And then I think as a family, as a caregiver, trying to plan other things. And I know that this is like just hard. A lot of things were shut down this year. But, you know, just, hey, let's go. We're going to, after dinner tonight, you know, 30 minutes, we'll watch our family show and then we'll go on a walk. Because the kids kind of like to know sometimes that there's something else coming, you know. Otherwise they might be bored. Somebody else asked about like traveling, like if it's a bad idea to have kids use screens when traveling. And I was thinking, like, do you want your sanity? So yeah, you know, let them do whatever they want. No, I don't think it's necessarily bad, but I think if you can plan other things, especially with younger kids, that helps. I was on a flight recently and the mom behind me had like, oh bless her, had like a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old kind of on her own. And like, we hadn't even taken off yet. And I hear the 4-year-old be like, Mom, the phone died. She's like, well, you're just going to have to be quiet. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's like a 3-hour flight. Like, I don't think, so they're kicking the seats and they had it. Yeah, it was tough for them. So I thought, oh man, that would have helped, you know, if I was like looking through my bag, I was like, do you have any crayons? Or that's not going to entertain them for 3 hours. But if the whole plan was just screen time, like, oh, we're in for a rough time. But, you know, kind of having that plan. Okay, we're going to travel. You guys can watch this movie. Then after that, we're going to just have some quiet time, or you can read, or you can color. Talking it out with them, but depending on the age too. Your teenagers might not be as into that if you're traveling with them. And I think, you know, front loading, as we know, front loading younger kids. You know, hey, we've only got a couple more minutes for this show, and then we're going to turn it off, and then this is, you know, we're going to brush our teeth, and then this is what we're going to do next. That does not solve. You all know this, you know, temper tantrums, they still happen. Because another question was kind of about limiting a child's screen time and to avoid temper tantrums. And so, you know, good luck. No, I'm just kidding. I think, again, you know, setting those limits, front loading kids, again, we got 5 minutes, we got 2 minutes, and there still might be temper tantrums. But it helps for them to know, like, okay, then what are we doing next? I think it honestly works for older kids as well too. Sometimes, you know, just to limit that and like, hey, when this is done, we're going to go do this. Adults, we lose track of time as well. So maybe putting the timer on for kids, which hopefully will help with the temper tantrums in the long run. Probably still going to have a couple, but they'll get, you know, hopefully more used to that. Another study that I found really interesting was just saying too that, you know, technology using the screens, it drops, we know that it gives us like dopamine. And so they're saying that kids' cortisol levels get raised. physiologically how this works. And so they're like, oh man, we've all had a kid be either like they didn't get a nap and they're either like super grumpy or they're like super giddy, like off the walls. And they're like, kids kind of do the same thing with technology sometimes when they've had like too much of it. So they get like have these major meltdowns, or they're just like off the walls because like of the dopamine and the cortisol level. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So that might be just something, if a kid's having temper tantrums a lot, maybe it's worth like kind of narrowing down the amount of time. It might be too much for them, or they're getting like overstimulated. So there was several questions about managing screen time with teenagers, valid questions. Someone kind of asked specifically for a 14 and 11-year-old, as well as kind of like recommended time for 13-year-olds. And then someone else kind of asked about terms, especially this year of balancing virtual learning with tech time for kids to want to be, online and be social. And teens are, it's tough. Like just hopefully you feel, again, affirmed. If you're raising a teenager, like it's tough. They utilize technology so easily. They honestly know more about it than us a lot of times. And they're still developing that frontal part of their brain. So yes, they're impulsive. So it's this like crazy mix. Like they know more than us, they love technology, and then they have, they're kind of going through an impulsive time with their behavior. I think again, the modeling good phone use is helpful. Like I said, I catch myself being distracted, even sometimes at work, and we can't really expect them to act in a way that we don't. And I think, again, finding out what they think. Teenagers have a lot of opinions, and I know sometimes when we actually ask them, they're like, there can be grunting or unsure. But I think if we're listening non-judgmentally, ultimately they will tell us. And my sister teaches high school, and she told me she has kids that have said, oh, when my mom like takes my phone, when I get grounded from my phone, it's kind of nice. It's like a relief. I don't have to like be responding all the time to my friends and stuff. And so I've heard that from more than one kid. I'm like, oh, they're outing themselves right now. But again, talking with them, I think if your 14-year-old has, 10 o'clock bedtime, or they need to be in their room, at 10, and all their friends get online to play a video game at 8. Maybe that's when you're kind of willing to give them an hour of tech time, like, hey, let's talk about this. You come home, you do your homework, you do your chores, and then that's kind of your time. But I also want to remind you, this isn't going to be like set in stone every single night. Like grandma comes over on Thursday nights for dinner, and if she's still here at 8, like it's not going to be okay for you to go to your room and do that. You need to stay and hang out with her. Or, when your brother has his baseball game, on Wednesday nights, we go to that as a family, and that is going to be part of it. So I think just reminding them that your desire for the technology is, you want them to have the things and you want them to have the friends and socialize, but it's not to impede on really important areas of life. And again, their overall functioning. So I think it shows, particularly if you think about middle school, like you're putting the limits and then having them respect those limits really shows them responsibility. And I was trying to explain to a kid the other day, like why adults are like, okay, if you do these things and you're responsible in this area, then you get this other thing. He's like, those things aren't even related. I was like, oh, but they are in adults' minds. We just want you to show responsibility. If you do your chores, then like, yes, you can kind of earn this other thing. So technology should be no different, I think. And really that sleep part is tough. I know kids want to have their phones and stuff, but they've also found kind of research-wise that sometimes kids feel they have to respond. They've got their phone on in the middle of the night, a friend texts them. And so you could also make some boundaries around that. Like, hey, we all charge our phones in the kitchen at nighttime, or like the phone stays in, mom's room at nighttime, so that they can get a good night's sleep without feeling like they have to like respond. And somebody else kind of asked about a teen who needs their phone constantly, and they kind of will panic if they don't have it. And I would say this kind of depends on maybe how much they like panic. Like some kid will be like, oh my gosh, my phone. And then, oh, okay, I have it. But then, they'll go for hours and not looking at it. So I work with a few kids that I would say struggle in this regard on high school age. Several of them struggle with anxiety in general. And so in a way, the phone is just this kind of vehicle for that. Like they do feel stressed and anxious a lot about things. And so then the phone is kind of the self-soothing way to connect to things, either to constantly be texting friends or looking at videos that make them feel better. And that's not negative. But again, it's kind of about how much it's impeding other areas of life. And I think they can, again, have these expectations, like my friend or my boyfriend or my girlfriend, like I need to answer right away, or like I'm going to miss out on this group chat that my best friends are having. So depending on how much they panic, if you really feel like it's a lot, I might look for some additional help in terms of, maybe their school social worker or a therapist, just somebody to kind of talk through that. Maybe there might be some underlying things. And again, the phone is just a vehicle for that. But if not, I would maybe work on weaning them off kind of a little less time in a positive way. Like, hey, could we, would you run to the grocery store with me to pick up a few things for dinner, but could you leave your phone here? Because I just want to be able to talk to you and see how your day was. And kind of asking the kid even, do you think something else would help soothe you in the same way? Because I think kids don't realize sometimes, and adults do it too, that we use those things to self-soothe. But there might be other things that do it just as well for us. Another question was about the best way to monitor. It's interesting because the research with that actually shows there's a lot of apps and different parental controls that you can monitor what your kids are doing. But the research around that shows that actually having the conversation with them about it is the best. So if you're going to use a control, which is totally fine, to let kids know ahead of time so that they're not surprised, especially older kids. And so, if you have a 16-year-old and you're very concerned, if you're going to put the app on, I would talk with them about it versus just like throwing it on there and then they find out. I think it's sometimes a violation. They feel violated their trust. But I think if you have younger kids and say you want to start doing it now, I'll just have the conversation that says, we're doing this not necessarily because we don't trust you, but because there's adult things that sometimes kids shouldn't see on there. And so really, again, the research was like, be curious, ask questions, have your kids show you what they're interested in is really some of the best way to monitor. They called it, what do they call it? Parental mediation. The idea that when parents get involved, it actually like reduces risks for kids online, and the positive effects of technology go up. So you've got the power there. Some other questions were about kind of what age the kid should have a cell phone or social media. And then really that was kind of interesting. Let me get to my slide here. So you can read through all these. I'll talk through them a little bit too, but they really said when they feel like, your kid is emotionally ready, can show responsibility, and kind of understand some of these different things on here. So there's no magic age, which I wish there was. It could be like 14. But I would honestly wait for your child to ask for one, rather than offer, when they're 9, like, hey, do you want a phone? Because I think most kids are going to say yes, but they might not be ready for that. And kind of use that chance to have a conversation with them about the pros and cons. There's on the much more like restrictive, conservative ends with different parenting things I looked up. There's parents that are like, I know my kid wants an iPhone and that's what's cool and everybody loves it, but I'm going to give them a flip phone so that they can get a hold of me. They're riding the bus now. They're 10, but I don't want them to access things on the internet. So there are other options. There's some devices too where you can just use like Wi-Fi, like they have to be in Wi-Fi just to be able to like text and stuff like that. Or you can set it to where they like can't text certain people. It could just be to you if you want, your kid to have a phone for safety, but then you don't want them to have access to other things. In terms of social media, I guess my biggest question with it would be like, can the account be set to private? For like example, on Instagram, you can create a whole profile and you can make it private so that people have to, request you as a friend. And then so I think for kids, when they're first getting social media, I'd say if there's not like private settings where just anyone can message them anything, I probably would not let a kid have it. And then again, reminding them it's not about that you don't trust them, you just can't control what other people put out there. Social media is tough because there's a lot of different things going on within lots of different apps that are popular that kids like, and it's like hard to know if these are like safe for your kid or not. Someone asked kind of if there's better social media platforms than other ones or if there's specific ones to avoid. And I think maybe the app themselves are less of the problem because again, there's can be positive and negatives with all of the apps, but really how you feel like your child's ability and like to handle and navigate it and like their maturity. But I also would follow the age recommendations on apps. So a lot of them, like you're not supposed to be able to use it unless you're 13. And I would kind of follow that. I think there's, reasons for that. And then also letting them know when they're first getting social media, I think that'd be a good time to have a conversation that says like, hey, we're trusting you, we're letting you have this, but for this first 6 months, 1 year, whatever, I'm going to have the password and I'm going to check in on it periodically. So that, again, they know ahead of time, but also it's just seeing like, how are they handling this? And, you could always scale it back. Like, I don't love all the things, not even that you're posting, but that some of your friends post. So can we just kind of scale this back a little bit? Or if they're doing things that you don't agree with as well. There was another question kind of about like, if there was educational screen time suggestions. And I think they were kind of asking maybe for 5-year-olds. And so I don't know, if they're in school yet or not, but I would actually check in with their teacher if they have one. Or if you have like, an older siblings teacher that needs to have, or, family friends or other parents, first, like sort of some parent approved ones that are geared for their age. Because I know, like, I think this person had about like, oh yeah, my kid loves watching YouTube, but I want them to really be doing more educational stuff. Which I totally get, but there's some really great apps out there that are really educational, but I cannot keep up with all of them. So that's why I thought, like, maybe asking a teacher or, parents that have, that have a kid the same age. There's some really, really good ones, specifically for education, and then they can watch the kids' YouTube video after they've done the more educational stuff. But to try to kind of balance that, because there's a lot of benefits to technology and a lot of educational stuff. Safe apps for a 10-year-olds. I would say that kind of depends on what your kid is interested in. If their goal is to socialize online, or if it's more that they have like certain games that they like to play. Because there are a lot of great apps out there and a lot that are kid friendly and kind of made for kids, but it's hard to say, if certain ones are like safe or not. I would say more that I would go through them with your kid, kind of when you have time, before letting them use it alone, and just saying like, hey, I'm curious about this too, or I want to see kind of what you're interested in. And I don't know, I heard this one was okay, but I want to just make sure it's like, it follows the rules of our house. So hopefully your kids are okay with that. Sorry, I was just going to put this slide up here, which are some of the books that I read and some of the different authors that are kind of doing research in the field. I can also like click copy and paste that into the chat if you want. The last one on there, number 7, is a family media use tool, and that is from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And if you go onto that website and click on the media part, they have a lot of things about kind of creating like a family media plan. And they had some really good resources, and then they have a lot of articles and research on their website. So I found that pretty easy to use, because like, who has time to read books? I read all these books, so you guys don't have to. Yeah, but most of these were available at the Topeka Library, and there's a lot of good podcasts and things out there too. Some of the books were, where you could listen to them, audiobooks, because I know parents are so busy and no one has time to read books. A couple more questions here. Somebody else just said that, they feel like their kid would rather use screens than like anything else, but it was concerning because their kid is 7. So I was like, oh, this could be a long road, through their childhood. But I think, again, maybe to try to have some positive conversations like, hey, you are so good with technology. You really help, mom and grandpa out a lot. So we know you really like using it. But also because you're still growing, we have to put some limits on it, because we need your brain to grow in other ways. And it's not something that's going to be good for you to do all the time, even though if we let you, you would. So let's make an agreement about how much time is gonna work, and then just reminding kids we can revisit it. It's like, okay, for 2nd grade, this is our plan, but it's not gonna be the same forever. And if you show responsibility and that, find other interests that you have and do those, and we can revisit this. So I think one of the things I found with the younger kids I work with is, and they use they have a lot of screen time and a lot of like video game stuff. They really struggle to have imagination and like creative stuff outside of the games. It's like what they do is just repeat the game to me over and over and over and talk about like all the things. And it just is, it's something they really love, and that's great. But you want them to think more broadly, and especially at these younger ages and these developmental things, to be able to think really broadly about the world and other things, going on, and to be able to talk about other things. Or I'm like, what other interests do you have? And they're like, I don't know, I just like to game. Out of the whole world, it's the only thing you like to do. And then you do other things and they find out they like those things too. So another one was kind of about how to get kids involved with other activities when the caregivers that they have don't follow the rules. I was like, oh my goodness, This is why I don't work with adults. They're tougher than kids sometimes. Just kidding. But it's really a valid question. I think especially during a year where we've been remote learning. And I know, so it was like, okay, my mom can take them on this day, and then grandpa could take them on the other day to do the remote learning. And it was just this mishmash of safe people to be with your kids. And I mean, it was a lot. It was crazy. So I would say, maybe first having a conversation, you maybe had 20 already with the caregiver. Maybe bring a list of the other activities that you've done when everyone's calm that kids like to do, and having a conversation with the child and the caregiver and saying like, hey, are these things that we could do? And that's if you can like risk maybe offending, this might be a free babysitter and we don't want to like make anybody mad. I know this is like the tough part of it. But then I would maybe move, like if that doesn't work, to controls on the device that would like shut it, like having a conversation with the kid and the caregiver and saying like, okay, but like what I feel comfortable with is 2 hours a day or 3 hours on a not school day. And then after that, the device is gonna like shut off, because there are like control things you can do for that. And then, or maybe also realizing that like you may have no control over the situation, based on, whatever your circumstance is, and just saying to yourself and to your child, like, hey, when we go to Granny's house, she lets you be on the tablet all day. And I don't feel comfortable with that. I've already told her. And so it's not a punishment, but when you come home for the day, or when, I get home from work, we're not going to have any more tech time after that, because you've already had more than enough during the day. And then we're just going to do other stuff after that, which it makes your job as a parent like so much harder. But hopefully it's kind of worth it in the long run. And also just the idea that like, yeah, your kid won't be ruined. There was no research out there to say your kid will be totally ruined if they have too much tech time. But I know it's tough sometimes with, even with parents, like the other parent in the house. I'd be like, well, I love video games and you don't love them. And how much time should your kid have with them? And then the last question, and I didn't have a good answer for this one. It was a good question. Someone asked about support that we get from the state of Kansas to educate on this topic. And I don't know actually of any resources. They're probably out there. So it, like just spurred in my mind, I should do some more research on my own to find out kind of what resources are out there. But yeah, it's an important topic to educate on, and then hopefully maybe in the future if it's not there already. So sorry that I'm ending on that note. I'm like, oh, I have no clue. But I need to, figure some stuff out.
That's not the way to end it, Sarah. You should.
I know, sorry. You guys are all great, but no, I just wanted to, again, thank you all for coming, because it's like time is precious. I love that we're talking about like kids not using screen time, and then you had to watch me on a screen for the last hour.
Hang on a second. You're not off the hook yet.
Oh, okay.
Wanted to, somebody in the group made a comment that they had a friend who allowed their daughter, and this is in the chat, if you can see that a friend had allowed their daughter to use TikTok and YouTube on their phone. And are you able to see that? Rather than
maybe.
They had a friend who allowed their daughter to do TikTok and YouTube on her own iPhone in the car. Her 9-year-old brought the phone into this person's home that is in the group. And she didn't know that, which is a little bit frustrating when that happens. But the person in the group took out the phone and checked it out, and they called the friend to explain that they weren't happy. She thought she had put the settings on private and restricted, and she had not. And that's something we all need to be cognizant of. And lots of times things like Google, even if you set the settings on restricted or private, sometimes they automatically revert back when you log out of whatever the program is. Any comments about things like that? Restrictions, private, restricted, anything like that?
Any comments for me on that?
Yeah.
Any
cautions, anything at all?
No, I think that is actually a really good point. That, well, number one, that like that's the other hard thing of parenting, is that even people that we love and trust like do things totally different in their house sometimes, and like, oh, that's what I want my kid to have access to. So that's, I think, always an issue. But yeah, the privacy stuff is really tough, because again, I think kids are smarter than we are with some of this stuff, and sometimes know how to get around it. Not even they're always trying to be sneaky. Sometimes they're just like, oh, this is like, well, I just want to watch this. And But there are definitely some apps for it. I had even a teenager recently tell me that like it's something that just like for her, it just shuts everything down at like 10 p.m. or something that her dad has. She had some frustrations with it because she's like, sometimes I want to be able to text somebody. But again, I was like, well, have a conversation about that. But no, it's so hard. There's no really like great one way to do that. But I would check in frequently on like privacy settings with kids, and you could always like positively reframe it like, well, we're just going to see how you've been doing, and we might, like see if you've been responsible. If you try to frame it that way. But I think also having that plan with kids about when they access something that either they know mom doesn't want them to see or that they feel weird about, that they come to you, and instead of it being a punishment, it's like, hey, this is why we didn't want that to happen. Or like, I know Lizzie's mom lets her do that, but in our house, we don't feel as comfortable with that, which of course, then you have to tell your kid not to go to school and tell Lizzie that her mom's like not teaching her the right stuff. But yeah, it's tough. And there's, the school has like 501 is where I work, and they have, stuff restricted. And I still had kids accessing stuff on YouTube that was like, whoa, because they found the way around it. Ugh. So that kid and I was like, well, every week we're going to check in, and because he thought he like deleted his history, but he didn't. I was like, I know how to check that. And then I'm like, we're going to talk about why you're viewing these things, because it was a mental health issue at the end of the day. So.
Right. One other thing I want to let folks know about, and actually maybe you can address it, Sarah. We do have an emotional support app that kids can use called 7 Cups, kids 13 and up. Sarah, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love having, like, that's the positive things about technology is kids, having these apps on their phone. And yeah, so the idea with 7 Cups is that it's available 24/7, 365 for texting, because a lot of kids actually in this generation don't love talking on the phone, or they don't really know how to. So if a kid's kind of feeling alone, or they're having, some maybe thoughts of self-harm, that they can text on there and get, like a safe person to talk to them. And sometimes that's really helpful to have because, hopefully kids have safe people in their life at school or their case manager, but we're not available 24/7. So I think, the idea with that too is like an app isn't going to be the only thing for a kid, but hopefully it would be a launching point, to have a conversation like, hey, I noticed you didn't feel comfortable, to talk with me about this. And that's great. I'm glad you reached out for help. What are ways that, I as a parent can support you with that? But there's a lot of apps. I think even there's like this on the suicide line now, instead of having to call, like people can text into that as well. So just something, for teenagers, because kids go through tough times and sometimes it's just temporary, but they need that support, and they're, because of technology and things, it's an instant gratification. So they kind of need that sooner rather than later. I don't know that.
And just for everybody, I just put in, if you think your child 13 or over, 7 Cups is absolutely free. There are some places in it where you can actually do therapy over the phone or via text. That does cost, but the basic 7 Cups app is free. I put in the chat where your child can go to where they need to go to get that app. And also we have a code word, which is talk, and that's over here in the chat. So if that's something you think your child might be interested in, I highly encourage you to take advantage of it. It's a resource that we brought to Family Services, brought to Shawnee County, and we think it's incredibly helpful. It gets used a lot, and the kids who use it really seem to find a lot of value in it.
Yeah, and I would sorry, I can now access the chat for some reason I couldn't before, but I appreciate, the person who put in too about, a 4th grader that had, viewed porn and stuff. And I think, I don't want to like scare anybody, but I went to like a whole conference on that, and it's like kids are accessing things like that much, much younger than we want them to. So I really appreciate that idea of just having these conversations with kids to say, this is out there, you might come across this, and you can't unsee it once you've seen it, but please let an adult know so that we know kind of how to help you navigate that. I know these conversations are so awkward, for us as adults, it feels awkward to talk about, but I think it makes things much safer for kids in the long run, and then, yeah.
Okay, well, we're wrapping up. I do want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Also wanted to say once again, if you need a certificate of attendance or you want one, please drop your first and last name in the chat with the word certificate, and we can get that out to you. The other thing I wanted to share with you is, and give me a second to get this up and going, because I want that to get out of the way. Now this is not working the way I had hoped. Hold on a second. Okay, go to my share screen. It's a really cool initiative that we're working with here at Family Service and Guidance Center, and it is called, doggone it, I'm not able to get it. Yep, there we go. There we go. It's called Kansas Stronger Together. The state of Kansas was lucky to get some grant money from the federal government. This is a resource that anyone can use. A client, FSGC client, non-client, anybody. And this can help provide resources and information if someone's dealing with like all kinds of things. If they're just scared, if they're sad or afraid, if the pandemic has them feeling lonely and isolated, if they're dealing with unemployment issues, money, food scarcity, anything like that, folks can go to our website and go to fsgctopeka.com/stronger, as in Kansas Stronger Together, fsgctopeka.com/stronger. There's a brief form you can fill out, and you can explain on that form, here's what I'm dealing with. I'm homeless. I don't know where to go to get help. I can't feed my family. I need help. Whatever it is, you just put that in the notes section. And within 2 business days, one of our folks, just like Sarah, will give you a call back to say, here's some resources that you might want to look into. And I do know for a fact that a lot of our staff members, it's not just, here's a phone number, go call somebody. They've been following up with people to make sure that they're getting the services that they need to kind of get themselves back on track post-pandemic. So this is a great resource. And I hope if you know, either you may need help or maybe you know someone who needs help, please let them know about this. fsgctopeka.com/stronger. It's free, doesn't cost a nickel. So we're just trying to get the word out. If you can help us share that, that would be wonderful and terrific and all that good stuff. Let's see. Our next real world parenting conversation is Thursday, May 17th, 6:30 to 7:30. Patricia Bryan, who has been a therapist for something like 30 years, she's celebrating her 30-year anniversary soon, will be bringing all that to the table. She's going to talk about helping children cope with traumatic events. So, Sarah, any closing remarks or anything else you'd like to share?
No, just thanks for coming. And yeah, parenting is a hard job. It's gotten even more interesting in the past, year, but just even with this rise of technology. And again, it's okay to not know everything. And I think kids already know that about us. They already know we don't know everything. So sometimes they like it when we say like, what, I don't know, but let's figure this out together. And again, if you ever need help, please, I hope you never feel shy or ashamed about asking for help, whether it's a school social worker or calling us and, your, child's Sunday school teacher. Like, I just think people are out there and want to help. And we just sometimes have to get over that hurdle of like, oh, somebody's going to judge me for being a bad parent. It's like, no, wanting help and looking for it in this world is, yeah, we all need it. So
if you want to call us 232-5005, whatever, we can help. We can help your child. We can help your family. So feel free to give us a call. So on behalf of Sarah, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. And we will talk to you hopefully next month at the next Real World Parenting Conversation. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye-bye.